it's me. Today we're gonna look at some Mr. Ballin, because you know I really like his videos. Top 3 places you can't go. So let's get into it.
Today, we're going to look at 3 places you can't go and people who went there anyways. But before we get into those stories, if you're a fan of the strange, dark, and mysterious delivered in story format, then you've come to the right place because that's all we do and we upload once a week. So if that's of interest to you, please sneak into the like button's house and slightly unscrew all of their light bulbs so they don't turn on. Also, please subscribe to our channel and turn on all notifications
Check 'em out
so you don't miss any of our weekly uploads. Okay, let's get into today's stories.
Yes. Mr. Ballin, the new member.
At 10:30 a.m. on October 30th, 2005, a 33-year-old pastor named Kyle Lake stood on a stage inside of the University Baptist Church in Waco, Texas.
Okay.
Kyle had just finished delivering that morning's sermon to his congregation, which included about 800 people. And now he was about to welcome a new member, a young woman. So Kyle had been the pastor of this church for the last 7 years. And over that time, the church had really grown and evolved, really directly because of Kyle's leadership. He was known as being a very thoughtful and educated pastor, who was also known to be quite fun and progressive. He often would play pranks on the congregation and keep things really light, even if he was in the middle of a very important sermon. And people liked that. It made him relatable. And so because of Kyle's youthful energy that he clearly gave off, he had sort of gradually shifted the congregation to being a much more young crowd. Predominantly the folks who attended the church were college kids, or roughly that age. And also his wife was an attendee at the church, as were his 3 little kids, who at the moment, as he was up on stage, they were across the hall attending kids' Bible study. Now, for Kyle, welcoming a new member into this church had become a very big deal for him. He, in fact, had this special ceremony he would perform for each and every new member. And really, the whole congregation got behind this ceremony. And so today, Kyle was about to do this ceremony with this new member, this young woman. And so Kyle, in front of the whole congregation, he calls this woman up, come on up, we're going to do the ceremony to welcome you to the church.
What kind of ceremony are we talking about?
She gets up and she walks up to the front of the stage and she smiles and Kyle says hello to her and sort of introduces himself and the whole church is listening. And then Kyle, as part of this ritual, moved to the very center of the stage where the actual ceremony was going to take place. And he was about to call the woman up to join him in the center of the stage when there was a malfunction. Now, the malfunction itself was not really a huge deal. All it did was just stop Kyle for a second, and he had to stop talking to the new member, and he had to figure out what he was going to do, but quickly he saw a fix that didn't even require him to leave the stage.
No.
However, the instant he actually made the fix, when he fixed the malfunction, as he was about to start talking to the whole audience again, he just began to scream. Now, at first, nobody took this seriously.
Electrocution,
because their pastor was known for playing pranks on the congregation.
Oh, I don't know.
And so everybody just thought it was a prank, albeit a strange one. I mean, he's screaming at the top of his lungs, but everyone's sort of looking around like, this is a prank, right? But then Kyle's screams began to include words. He began screaming, "Help! Help me!" And at that point, it sort of clicked for the whole congregation that this was not a joke. Something was terribly wrong. Even though they're looking up at him and nothing appeared to be wrong. Nothing made sense. And so immediately it was like the church spiraled into chaos and confusion. People are bowing their heads, praying as fiercely as they could, praying for his safety. Others are sprinting out of the church, not even knowing what to do. And still more were calling 911, like several people calling 911. And then by the time the paramedics showed up, it was like people still had no idea what actually was happening. In fact, honestly, the paramedics didn't. It was like, what is this? But within a few days, they were able to figure out what happened.
What was it?
And it surprised everyone. The special ceremony that Kyle would perform for every new member was a baptism. And so when Kyle moved to the very center of the stage and he actually called up the woman to join him in the center of the stage, he actually was stepping into the baptismal pool.
That's what I
Picture
thought.
like a hot tub, waist-high water, it's warm water. And so Kyle literally stepped into the hot tub and he's calling up this woman to join him in the pool so she can be baptized. However...
Okay, wait. If he's screaming, "Help me," and they know that there's water in a baptismal pool, Haven't they, like, figured, like, I figured right away it was electrocution.
Before this woman actually got to the pool, Kyle has this malfunction. And all it was is his lapel mic shut off. It wasn't working anymore. And because the church he was in was huge and cavernous, sound really didn't travel well. He needed a microphone to project his voice. And so he had to stop the ceremony for a second and find another microphone. Luckily, there was a stand with a microphone in it right within arm's reach.
Oh no.
So Kyle grabbed it. However, what Kyle didn't know was there actually was a second malfunction that had happened either at this instant or just before, but either way, there was another malfunction that he had no idea about. And that was that the heaters of the baptismal pool that kept the water warm were damaged. And as a result of this damage, the water in that pool had become electrically charged. And so the instant Kyle grabbed that microphone.
Oh no, I'm just saying, I'm just telling you now. If for some crazy reason I ever became a preacher of a church and I gave baptisms in a baptismal pool, you can damn well guarantee the water is going to be cold, because I'm not putting electrical heaters in the water. Nope, not happening.
He grounded the electricity in the pool. Basically, he created a pathway for the electricity to travel through his body. When he began to scream, that was him being electrocuted. Despite the efforts of first responders and the medical staff at the hospital, Kyle unfortunately did not survive. As for Kyle's wife, who literally watched this happen from the front row of the church, she watched her husband be killed. She ultimately sued the electrical company that installed those heaters in the baptismal pool, and she would settle for an undisclosed amount of money.
Good. But that's not going to bring him back. 2, volunteer. Yeah, she sued him.
Around 5 p.m. on Sunday, August 15th, 1971.
She sued him, and that's great. I hope she got a lot of money, but her husband's gone. She had 3 little kids. That's so sad.
A 23-year-old man named Michael was sitting inside of his living room in rural Ontario, Canada. Michael was flipping through a photo album that showed pictures of him scuba diving and mountain biking and doing all these really high adrenaline activities because
junkie.
Michael really lived for adventure. And so as he's flipping through this album, he hears a knock on the door. So he stops what he's doing, he goes to the door, he opens it up, and there's this police officer who's totally frantic and is speaking a mile a minute, and he tells Michael, hey, so we had this guy who was swimming in a lake nearby, and he went missing. He's been gone for over an hour now. We don't know where he is, and we were asking around, does anybody have any scuba diving equipment or experience, because we need to get in there and look for this guy in the lake, and everybody said, you're the guy. You have scuba equipment, and maybe you might be able to lend it to us, so that, the police could go in there and look for this guy. Now, Michael was kind of caught off guard by all this. I mean, this was not a typical occurrence to have police show up and have this type of request, but Michael immediately felt this sense of responsibility. He did know that he was sort of the top dog in scuba diving in rural Ontario, Canada, and he's hearing this police officer say what he's saying, but he's thinking, even if I give you my equipment, you can't just put the stuff on and safely conduct dives. You need the training as much as you need the equipment. And so Michael just kind of instinctively said, hey, look, I'm not just going to give you the equipment because I feel like I'm setting you up for failure here. What if I come with you, I'll put the equipment on, and I'll go look for this guy. I know what I'm doing. I know how to use the equipment. It'll be way safer and more efficient. And the cop said, thank you so much. That would be great. Let's go. And so Kyle, he went and got his scuba equipment, and before long, he had thrown it in the police cruiser, and the two of them were flying towards the lake. About 30 minutes later, Michael and the police officer pull into this parking lot, this wooded lot with trees everywhere, and straight ahead of them, through the trees, they can see down below is this big lake. And then to the left of the lake is a big dam, and then beyond that, over to the left side of that, is a river. And so where the swimmer had gone missing was in the lake portion. And so Michael quickly hopped out of the car, he grabbed his scuba gear, and then he and the officer took off running through the trees down to the lake.
He's just trying to be nice.
When they got down there, Michael scanned the area, and he saw there were all these police officers and park employees. There were other people who clearly had just come to the lake that day, like tourists, and everybody's kind of scanning the lake. No one's really in the water, but everyone's sort of walking around the perimeter perimeters, like hoping they can just see this missing swimmer somewhere. And also Michael noticed clearly the family of this missing man was, off to the side, and many of them were crying. But it definitely seemed like no serious search effort had really happened yet. It's like everybody was just kind of waiting for something to happen. And so when Michael shows up with all his scuba gear, it was like everybody looked at him as like, oh my goodness, thank you. Like, get in there, find him. Like, I bet he's okay. Like, get out there.
The brigade is
and
here.
Michael, he's thinking to himself that he hadn't done a search like this before, but the fact somebody was missing for that long already did not bode well.
No.
But he thought, you know what? I'm going to go in there. I'm going to give it my best shot, and I hope we find this guy still alive. And so Michael put on all his equipment right on the shore side, and everyone's waiting, kind of watching, anxious about what's going to happen next. And once he had donned his equipment, Michael stood up and just began scanning the lake, looking for, any sign of where to begin the search.
Not a real photo of
one
Michael.
Man in this huge body of water. He needs sort of a starting point. And so it's quiet. Everyone's just kind of watching Michael as Michael's looking around the lake. And then at some point, he looked out and he saw there was this little ripple sort of right in the middle of the lake. Now, the surface of the lake had basically been glass-like because nobody was really in the water, save for like the very perimeter of the lake. And so the water was very calm. But he sees there's this little ripple sort of right in the middle. And so Michael points out the ripple to the other officer he was with and sort of anybody who could listen. And he said, okay, I'm gonna go in there and start searching right there. And so Michael goes into the water, kind of wades in till about his waist. And then he kind of looked around one more time, put on his mask, and went under the water. About 15 minutes later, the police officer who had originally gone and gotten Michael and driven with him to the lake, he was still just standing on the lake shore, along with the missing swimmer's family and other searchers, and pretty much everybody was just kind of waiting for Michael to give some sort of report about how the search was going. Now, Michael easily had enough air in his tanks to be out there for quite some time to do a pretty thorough search, and they're only 15 minutes in, so they don't really know if this is too early to expect feedback from Michael, but it's just tense. Everybody's just waiting, waiting to see what's going to happen. But at some point, as this officer is just standing there, one of the volunteer searchers comes bombing along the shore from up near the dam. They ran right down to this officer and said, hey, you got to come with me. We found something over there in the river. And so, at this point, the police officer is thinking, I bet they found the missing swimmer. They're probably not in this lake. Maybe they found them over in the river. And he's thinking the worst, right? So he runs with the searcher, he goes to the dam, he goes to the riverside on the other side of the dam, and there's this crowd of searchers and police that are all along the shore of the river. And so this police officer, he pushes through the crowd, expecting, frankly, at this point, to see a dead body, to see the missing swimmer. But when he parts the crowd and sees what they're all looking at, he realizes there has been a terrible mistake. So 2 hours earlier, when this missing swimmer first went missing, this is like before Michael was ever contacted, before he was out there searching for him. This is like the initial wave of panic that we have a person who is missing somewhere in this water. Well, a park employee had been really motivated to try to help with this search. And so without really telling anybody, they ran into the control room of the dam, and in there, they turned a valve. And this particular valve opened up a pipe that spanned from the lake back through to the river. And when this valve was turned and the pipe was opened up, water from the lake would go back into the river, basically draining the lake. This employee was thinking, if I drain the lake, it'll make it easier to search the lake where we believe this man has gone missing. Like, this will make it easier to search the lake. And so this pipe has been opened up, this 2-foot in diameter, 30-foot long pipe connecting river and lake. And it's sucking water like mad from the lake into that river. Nobody had really gone into the lake to look for this missing swimmer, believe it or not. So the lake really hadn't been touched as soon as this valve was turned. So the first person who went into the lake, once that was opened up, was Michael with his scuba gear on. And when he went into the water and actually flagged the ripple on the surface of the water, he didn't realize this, but that ripple represented this deadly undercurrent of all the water being sucked into this pipe. And so as soon as he went out and went under the water, the current pulled him so quickly and so hard that he couldn't resurface. All his equipment got yanked off his body and he was thrust into this pipe. And in the pipe, he got stuck and he drowned inside of the pipe before eventually being forced out the other end where his body spilled out onto the shore of the river. That's what everybody was crowded around once they got up to the riverside, Michael's dead body. 4 hours after Michael's body was found, they would find the missing swimmer. His body was located about 150 yards away from where Michael had first
Oh my God. Well, I just want to say the person that turned the valve on, wow. Like, you think if you're going to do something like that, you would tell someone, hey, by the way, I know that you guys are going to be searching for this guy. I'm draining the lake. Like, you think that would be communicated. Poor Michael, just trying to help out, ends up losing his life in one of the worst ways. Drowning inside a friggin' pipe. That's
entered the lake. His body was found on the shore of the lake, and so Michael had sort of been close, but unfortunately that current had pulled him under and killed him. Today, the lake has been permanently drained, in part because of this tragedy.
Wow. Routine maintenance.
At 5 a.m. on June 28, 1988, a 25-year-old man named Jeffrey Link stood in the supply room of a small factory in Auburn, Indiana. He reached up and he grabbed a container on the shelf, and then with it in hand, he turned, left the supply room, and walked out into the main factory area. So the factory where Jeffrey worked was called Bastion Plating Company. And what they did is they made chrome-plated parts for cars. And Jeffrey's specific job was being a machine operator, which meant he basically kept a bunch of these machines running and periodically had to do maintenance on them. And in fact, today he was doing that. He was doing maintenance. Now, in general, this job that Jeffrey did was actually pretty dangerous. The machines they worked on were big industrial machines that often got really, really hot. In fact, it was not uncommon for Jeffrey and his colleagues to come home with burns on their body just from, touching these different machines. But it was just part of the job, and Jeffrey didn't mind it. The pay was pretty good, and overall, the thing he liked the most about his job was just the camaraderie, the other people that worked there. There was about maybe 36 employees who worked at this factory, and it was like a tight-knit family. And so it was like they struggled together. The job was kind of gritty and difficult, but it felt worth it. So on this particular day, Jeffrey walked along this walkway in the main factory area, and as he passed by his colleagues, he said hello. Again, everybody's friends here. And eventually, Jeffrey reached the machine that he was going to be performing maintenance on. And this machine was huge. And the only way for him to actually perform maintenance was to get inside of the machine. But, to Jeffrey and to his colleagues, this type of thing was completely routine. This is not a big deal. So, as soon as he got to the machine, Jeffrey, with this container he had gotten from the supply room, stepped inside. A few seconds later, one of Jeffrey's colleagues, who was standing on that same walkway Jeffrey had walked across to get to the machine he was working on, this guy hears a loud thud sound coming from over here, over where Jeffrey is. And he turns and he looks into the opening of this machine where Jeffrey had gone, and he sees what appears to be Jeffrey just lying on the ground inside of this machine. And this coworker is just not really understanding what he's seeing. He knows he just heard a thud sound and he's sort of putting it together. And as he's watching, another coworker runs into the machine where Jeffrey is. Clearly they've seen, Jeffrey fall, and so they go in to try to help him. And the guy on the walkway is watching, and this second coworker who rushes into the machine with Jeffrey just suddenly collapses as well, right next to Jeffrey. What? And then two more colleagues come running over, they go into the machine, and they too collapse. All four people are just down.
Okay, wait, this is a plot twist that I didn't see coming. So it's electrocution, maybe? Oh, or fumes? Some kind of, I don't know.
Down inside of this machine. And so the coworker who's out on this walkway can tell clearly there's something bad over there. I don't know what's going on. And so they turn, they run out of the factory, and they call 911.
Yes.
When they come back inside to see what's happening in here before first responders have arrived here, this is just seconds later, this coworker comes back to that walkway, and he sees now there's 20 other of his coworkers that have sort of begun congregating in this area near this machine, and they're all stumbling around, they're all disoriented, people are vomiting. It's like all hell had broken loose inside of this factory, and nobody knew why. And then the first responders become nauseated and disoriented, and they're completely down for the count. It's like nobody could be in this factory without losing their senses and collapsing. It would not be until later, when authorities were able to go into this factory with proper protective equipment on, that they could actually examine this machine that Jeffrey had been trying to do maintenance on. And also they examined the container that Jeffrey had brought with him into that machine. When they examined those two things, they figured out what happened. So the machine that Jeffrey was performing maintenance on, this big machine, was a huge metal tank that had recently been used to store a chemical called zinc cyanide.
Okay.
And so it was going to be Jeffrey's job to go inside of this tank, literally, and clean the inside of it.
Okay.
And so that container he brought with him from the supply room was a chemical cleaning solution. However, the factory had two distinct types of chemical cleaning solutions, and it was very important which one you used depending on what you were cleaning. Jeffrey knew that. He just accidentally grabbed the wrong one. And when this wrong chemical cleaning solution interacted with the residue of the zinc cyanide inside of that tank, it pretty much immediately created a cloud of poisonous hydrogen cyanide gas. This gas immediately caused Jeffrey to pass out, and then each of the subsequent coworkers who rushed into that enclosed space were hit with this gas as well. They too passed out.
Cyanide is
and as
no
the gas
joke.
continued to grow and spread, and as more people showed up to see what was going on, the gas began causing other people to pass out and get sick, all the way until, first responders were there. It was like the whole factory was filled with this poison. And so between the factory employees and all the first responders, in total, 39 people were hospitalized from this poisonous gas. And of those 39 people, 5 people died, including Jeffrey, 3 people who rushed in immediately to try to help him and passed out next to him, as well as 1 additional coworker.
Oh no.
In case you haven't heard yet, our newest graphic novel,
I just want to say, like, if that were me, I might have died because I probably would have ran over. I don't know. Might have ran to get help. I don't know. But yeah. Okay. I don't want to say I like this series, but he's done a few top 3 places you can't go. And yeah, so it's really sad for them. But I like Mr. Ballin, and I will leave my info in the description for my Twitch, and follow me to the next one.